Welcome back, and thank you for choosing to fall asleep to another tale of made-up history. If this is your first time here, we create stories that mix myth, mystery, and the occasional dragon with real events, all to help you unwind. If you have your own combinations of fantasy and history you'd love to hear, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to bring them to life. Now close your eyes and take a deep breath. Tonight's story begins in 1916 on the battered soil of the Somme. But our journey starts centuries earlier, in the forgotten caves of Wales, where something ancient was never meant to wake. They called it the Black Glen, a stretch of highland wilderness in Snowdonia so dense, so wrapped in fog and superstition, it remained unmapped well into the 19th century. For generations, locals whispered of the glen's unnatural quiet, of thunder that came without storm clouds, of cattle that vanished in the night. But the world beyond Wales had little interest in fairy stories until 1807, when a royal surveying expedition sent to chart the area failed to return. A second team, led by Lieutenant Colonel Rupert Ashdown, ventured in weeks later. They returned white-haired, one man blind, with a discovery no one could have imagined. They had found bones, not fossilized, but fresh, scorched trees, stone caves etched with symbols far older than any known writing, and beneath it all, a massive, slumbering creature wrapped in blackened chains and dried moss. Ashdown's report, classified at the highest level, described it as a winged beast of unearthly proportion, dormant but living, neither bird nor lizard, but some terrible ancestor of both. The creature, nicknamed Scartha, was airlifted out under darkness and taken to a remote military facility in Northumberland. Thus began Operation Wormguard. Over the next 70 years, the British Empire poured hidden resources into the study and containment of what they now classified as Type 7 biological ordnance, Dragon. Only 4 were ever found, 3 male, 1 female, all hidden in glens and caves along the Celtic fringe. Theories ranged wildly that these creatures were guardians of lost druidic tribes, that they had hibernated for millennia, or that they were summoned by blood magic long lost to time. The truth never fully surfaced. What mattered was the possibility of control. And control, as it turned out, was elusive. Dragons were not machines. They did not respond to pain, to commands, or to incentives. They responded to emotion, rage, grief, and above all, instinctual loyalty. Only a rare few individuals could form bonds with them, a trait discovered by accident when a 14-year-old stable hand named Ellis Byrne wandered too close to a dragon's enclosure and emerged unharmed. These individuals, dubbed voices, underwent grueling training, not only to survive the presence of dragons, but to direct them without losing their minds. Most voices did lose their minds. By 1916, the war in Europe had become a nightmare of trenches, barbed wire, and senseless slaughter. Commanders on both sides knew they were trapped in a war of inches. As desperation mounted, the War Office revisited its most dangerous asset. The dragons, now kept in subterranean pens beneath a facility known only as Ash Barrow, had not been flown in over a decade. But the intelligence suggested the Germans were developing occult divisions of their own. Rumors of necromancers and wolf-bound scouts whispered among French survivors at Verdun. And so, 3 dragons were prepared for deployment. Each required its own crew of handlers, including 6 mental stabilizers, 4 sensory technicians, and a rotating team of veterinary magicians. Feeding them required nearly a dozen cattle per day. Transporting them involved reinforced iron convoys and smoke-blind flight routes. The dragons could not simply be pointed at the enemy. They had to be guided through an emotional tether so precise that any spike in adrenaline could cause them to panic, burn everything in sight, or even turn on their bonded voice. The one assigned to the Somme mission was a dragon called Morvrin, a dark-scaled behemoth with sea-green eyes and a temper so volatile that 2 prior voices had perished in bonding attempts. He had not flown in 17 years. His new voice was a 23-year-old soldier named Corporal Elias Trenwith, chosen not for his strength or rank, but for an accident. During a training fire, Morvrin had roared once, sending a wall of flame across the compound. Elias, unconscious nearby, had not been burned. When he awoke, the dragon watched him, unmoving. For reasons unknown, he had been accepted. Elias had no family, no legacy. He was a coal miner's son from Cornwall, quiet, disciplined, and constantly tired. But in Morvrin's presence, he found himself strangely awake. The dragon responded to his voice, not commands, but feelings. When Elias was calm, Morvrin slept. When Elias felt rage, the dragon stirred. When Elias spoke softly, the dragon lowered his head. He had 2 weeks to prepare. In that time, Elias underwent training in thought stabilization, guided meditation, and battle focus. He was forbidden from speaking to anyone outside his dragon crew. They called him a weapon, a necessity, a living key to something far older than war. On July 1st, 1916, at dawn, the Battle of the Somme began. The earth shook as over 1 million shells hammered the German lines. Men climbed from their trenches into smoke and chaos. And 30 miles behind the front, in a hangar disguised as a coal depot, Morvrin opened his eyes. Morvrin didn't roar when the hangar doors opened. He breathed deeply, a low, rolling exhale that made every soldier within earshot freeze. The scent of burning coal filled the air, though no fires had yet been lit. Elias stood just 10 paces from him, wearing a reinforced leather harness, lined with runes etched in old Brythonic script. They weren't for control. No one believed dragons could be controlled, but for anchoring, for trust. A bell rang twice. That was the signal. Elias closed his eyes and let his mind still. He thought of home, not the broken rows of mining houses or the pit his father died in, but the sea cliffs above them, wind, salt, the cry of gulls, and the silence that followed. Morvrin stirred. The dragon's wings, chained to the floor with thick iron links, flexed once, then again. Elias stepped forward, heart steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The bond sparked, handlers scattered, as the dragon's body began to glow faintly along its rib lines. Not light, but heat, pulsing in rhythm with Elias's breath. The chains fell away, singed. Morvrin lowered his head. Elias climbed the platform stairs, mounted the saddle between the ridges of the beast's spine, and latched in. No orders were shouted. The sky was already theirs. Morvrin leapt. It was not graceful. Dragons are not birds. They do not glide. They hurl themselves into the air, wings punching against gravity, each beat like a cannon blast. Elias held fast, jaw clenched, eyes wide. Below them, countryside blurred. Trees bent from the force of their passage. Clouds broke apart. And then the horizon opened, and the trenches came into view. The front looked worse than Elias had imagined. Blackened earth, ruptured fields, men scrambling like ants beneath smoke. The guns hadn't stopped for a week. Nothing living should have survived there, but they did. German machine guns, dug deep into concrete nests, shredded entire platoons, tanks jammed in mud, medics screaming. The air itself tasted of blood. Elias's mind recoiled. He had never seen war from above. Morvrin growled, not in fear but in hunger. The dragon did not feel pity. He felt Elias's revulsion, his panic, and tensed. Number not yet. Elias focused again, harder. He thought of a single face. His mother's, etched in the last photograph he carried. She had died of sickness before the war, long before dragons. But she had always calmed him. He whispered her name. Morvrin slowed. Then they dove. The German line didn't see them at first. Airplanes, primitive and slow, hovered miles away. Artillery was fixed forward. The dragon's shadow passed over 2 trenches before anyone looked up. And when they did, it was too late. Morvrin opened his jaws. The first gout of flame tore across a bunker line, turning machine gun emplacements into molten scrap. The fire wasn't like fuel. It was hotter, heavier, laced with something alchemical. It clung to metal. Screams echoed across the field. Elias flinched but held on. The rage wasn't his. It was Morvrin's. He had to guide it. He pushed the feeling, not revenge, not fury, but direction. That way. Keep moving. Don't burn the wounded. Don't fly too low. The dragon resisted, tail whipping once, catching a German truck and sending it spiraling. But it obeyed. Another nest. Burned. Another trench. Passed. Allied troops saw it, wide-eyed, many ducking in terror. One Irish company knelt as the dragon soared above them, unsure if this was miracle or doom. The sky shimmered with heat. Clouds split. Then came the counterfire. Anti-air guns, rusted but operational, began to swivel. From a distance, Elias heard sharp cracks. Explosions blossomed behind them. One clipped Morvrin's wingtip, not a direct hit, but enough to send them into a spin. The dragon roared, voice like thunder cracking stone. Elias gripped the harness, legs numb. He closed his eyes and shouted in his mind, not words but reassurance. We're not done. Pull up. Pull up. Morvrin listened. They righted just in time to avoid crashing into the remains of a French trench. The dragon wheeled around, flame gathering again in his throat. But Elias resisted. Number, you're not here to slaughter. You're here to end this, to make them run. That thought worked. They circled back, wings shredding clouds, and let loose a roar so deep it split the air. German lines wavered. A commander fled. Signalmen dropped their flags. Rumours began to spread instantly that Britain had tamed the devil, that hell had joined the Allies. But it wasn't enough. There were still 2 dragons waiting, and the enemy wasn't done yet. The second dragon was older, larger, and far less forgiving. Her name was Elgura, and she did not answer to any man. She had been raised in the northern fjords, coaxed from her stone egg by monks who whispered in forgotten tongues. Unlike Morvrin, Elgira had never bonded with a single rider. She was wild magic caged in scales, a weapon too costly to use, until the war left Britain with no choice. Elgira did not fly. She descended, her wings folding like spears as she fell into the battlefield from a carrier above the clouds. No harness, no signal, just fire, and she burned everything. German trenches dissolved beneath her fury. Barbed wire turned to liquid. Soldiers threw down weapons and ran, some clawing each other to escape. One officer was seen trying to wave a white flag before he was swept away in a gale of heat that cracked open the very earth. Elias, watching from Morvrin's back, gritted his teeth. He had seen dragons fly in training, but never like this. Elgyra wasn't a scalpel. She was Apocalypse. Behind them, Allied command had begun to move. 3 squadrons advanced, emboldened by what they thought was divine intervention. Planes buzzed overhead, avoiding the dragon's flight paths. Officers barked orders, not knowing whether to push or hold. No one had planned for this. Dragons were a last resort. Yet now, they were leading the charge. And yet, Elias knew it was working. The German line cracked. Retreats were called. Command posts abandoned. It was not total collapse, but it was the beginning. The tide was shifting until the 3rd dragon arrived. But something was wrong. Its descent was irregular. Wings tucked too tight. Velocity uncontrolled. It spun once, clipped a cloud formation, and then righted itself with an awkward lurch. Soldiers below cheered, but Elias's stomach sank. This wasn't one of theirs. The dragon was green-black, smaller than Morvrin, with deep scars across its flanks and no runes on its skin. German markings glinted on its chest harness. It had been taken or bred by the enemy, and now it was diving toward Allied lines. "Enemy dragon!" Elias shouted, but no one could hear. Morvrin had already seen it. His body tensed, wings twitching. Rage, raw and pure, coursed through him. Elias barely had time to brace before they were diving straight into the path of the oncoming beast. They collided mid-air. The shock was immense. Wings tangled, claws slashed, and the sky became a blur of flame and scale. Morvrin and the enemy dragon spiraled toward the ground, locked in a deadly grapple. Elias clung tight, heart pounding, ears deafened by screeches and roars. Then, at the last second, Morvrin wrenched free. The enemy dragon veered off, wing torn, screeching as it bled over no man's land. But it wasn't finished. It turned sharply and dove at the British tanks below. Elias had no choice. He urged Morvrin forward, mind blazing with urgency, not rage, focus. He directed the dragon like a symphony, each breath in rhythm with the creature's own. Together, they pursued, and the duel began in earnest. Fire met fire. Talons locked again. Morvrin twisted mid-air, using his tail like a mace. The enemy dragon fought dirty, biting, clawing, even diving through the smoke to blind them. But Morvrin was stronger, and Elias's mind never left him. They circled higher, climbed higher still. The clouds parted around them, and then they fell. Elias gave the command with a whisper, not in words but in memory. The cliffs, the wind, the sea. Morvrin tucked his wings and dropped. The enemy tried to follow, but it was wounded, slower, bleeding. At the last second, Morvrin twisted away. The enemy hit the ground like thunder. Silence followed. Elias exhaled, shaking. Morvrin hovered, wings beating slower now. He was tired. The flame reserves were spent, but the sky was clear. Below them, the Allied flag was rising. The trench had been taken, but this was only day 1. When Elias dismounted, his legs gave out beneath him. The impact of Morvrin's landing had rattled his bones, and the sheer pressure of guiding a dragon into battle left his thoughts fogged and distant. Medics ran toward him, but he waved them off. "See to Morvrin first," he murmured. He took the worst of it. Morvrin was scorched in patches, his breathing shallow but steady. Blood from shallow cuts mixed with soot on his scales. As the beast laid his head on the ruined field, a single low growl escaped him. Not anger, but warning. Elias turned. Elgyra. She stood motionless on a ridge above the trench, the last fires from her wrath smouldering behind her. Soldiers parted before her, as if she were a goddess, not a creature. Her head tilted slightly. eyes fixed on Morvrin. Elias couldn't read her expression. No one could ever truly read Sholjira. Then slowly, she unfolded her wings and vanished back into the mist. It was then that High Command realized dragons had tipped the balance, but they had also revealed a truth. The war was no longer just a clash of men and metal. It had become myth, and myths had their own rules. Back at HQ, Elias was summoned immediately. The tent was crowded with brass, generals, foreign dignitaries, even a few old keepers from the Royal Dragon Corps. Maps covered the table, all now useless. The front had shifted too fast. The Germans have won, General McTavish said flatly. Or had. You killed it. Elias nodded. It wasn't wild. Someone trained it. More will come, another muttered. We kept our dragon secret too long. They've caught up. A wrinkled man in ceremonial robes, one of the original keepers, stepped forward. They haven't caught up. Not yet, but they will. Unless we act. The tent fell silent. There is a vault, he continued, under Dunbar Castle. It houses 3 unbonded dragons. Too dangerous, too wild. But we may not have a choice. Elias's heart sank. You mean the Red Brood? The old man nodded grimly. The Red Brood were legend even among the Corps. Bred in isolation, untouched by human thought. They'd never been paired, never flown with a rider. Their fire was said to melt stone. Their rage had no leash. Then it's not a war, Elias said quietly. It's an extinction event. The generals exchanged glances, but the order was given. 3 days later, Elias stood at the edge of the Dunbar cliffs. The sea crashed violently below, and behind him, steel doors groaned as they opened for the first time in a century. Chains clattered, torches flickered, and the first dragon emerged. She was massive, not in body, but presence. Her scales shimmered red, black, and gold, like living ember. Her eyes were white, no iris, no emotion, just void. Elias stepped forward, palm raised. No words, no commands. The dragon growled. He felt its thoughts press into his skull. Not gently like Morvrin, but violently. Demands, instincts, a storm. It took everything he had not to scream. And then something shifted. The dragon paused, tilted its head, recognized something, and let him live. Morvrin, far off in a temporary roost, raised his head toward the wind. He had felt it too. The age of men was ending. The age of dragons had begun. The Red Brood did not obey orders. They responded to instinct, to chaos, and perhaps to Elias, but only barely. When they were released into the skies above northern France, they didn't wait for coordinates or targets. They soared upward into cloud and smoke, and the air turned red. Reports came in within hours. A German supply line gone, a division of heavy artillery vaporized, an entire hillside forest blackened to ash, but also a ruined Allied convoy, a French outpost destroyed by mistake, or perhaps not by mistake. Perhaps the dragons simply didn't care. Perhaps they were reminding the world. Power, once unleashed, could not be owned. Still, the Allies advanced. The Somme became legend, not just for the slaughter, but for the turning of the war. Trenches were no longer boundaries. They were scars on a battlefield, shaped by flame and wing. Soldiers no longer feared shells the most. They feared shadows overhead. And in that shadow, Elias was changing too. He no longer slept. Not truly. He no longer felt the nerves in his fingers. When he closed his eyes, he saw the fire, not behind him, but inside him. Morvrin sensed it. The bond between them was strained now, thinner than before. Elias was no longer just a rider. He was becoming something else. One night, as he approached Morverin's resting site, he found the dragon awake, watching the stars. Elias sat beside him, the scorched grass hissing under his boots. "They say the red brood can see through time," Elias murmured. "Not visions, just the weight of what comes next." Morverin didn't respond, but his tail thudded gently once against the ground. "They'll try to use them in Ypres next," Elias said. "But it won't work. Not the way they want. Not unless we..." He trailed off. The words were gone, replaced by something older. Elias placed his hand on Morverin's side, and for the first time he didn't speak to the dragon. He spoke with him, not as commander and beast, but as kin. The fire in his chest pulsed in rhythm with Morverin's. The heat did not burn, it bound. Then he saw it. A vision. Not from Morverin, not from the red brood, but from the battlefield itself. A German command camp, hidden, unmapped, and inside it, another dragon, alive, hooked to machinery, bound in iron, captured. They had more. Elias stood. "We go now." Morverin didn't hesitate. Within minutes, they were airborne. No briefing, no escort, just sky and purpose. The vision had been too clear to be random. It had been placed in his mind. A gift? A trap? As they flew low over the marshland, fog wrapped around them like a shroud. The wind was strangely still. And then, ahead, the camp. Exactly as he'd seen. Tents, armored trucks, generators, and the dragon. It was young, barely matured, its wings thin and underfed. Tubes fed into its veins, muting its fire. German scientists moved like priests around it, worshipping their weapon. Elias dropped from Morverin's back before they landed. He didn't wait for stealth, he didn't draw a weapon. He walked into the camp as if born there. Guards shouted, guns raised. He whispered one word, and the ground split. Morverin landed like thunder, scattering men like leaves. His roar shook trees. Elias moved straight to the dragon's cage. The young beast whimpered, eyes wild. "Shh," he whispered, reaching out. "I know." He touched the dragon's brow, and everything changed. The fire returned. The bindings melted. The air burned, and 3 silhouettes, man and dragon and freedkin, rose into the night sky like vengeance. The freed dragon, a slate-grey female with starlit flecks across her wings, was later named Nyx by the Royal Dragon Corps, but Elias never called her anything. To him, she was not a pet, not an asset. She was a symbol, proof that dragons were being bred, used, tortured on both sides, and she had chosen to follow him. Back at base, no one questioned where Elias had gone. They knew better now. Since the Red Brood's arrival, Elias had become more than a rider, more than a captain. Some whispered he was becoming one of them, a dragon in human skin. The High Command had begun to fracture. Some wanted to deploy the rest of the brood immediately, burn the entire German front to ash. Others warned that the dragons were becoming harder to recall, harder to track. Even the handlers were afraid. Already one dragon had vanished. Carnix, the largest of the 3, last seen heading north into the hills, smoke trailing from his wake like a comet. And as the summer of 1916 wore on, so did the silence. The Germans were too quiet. No major offensives, no retaliations, just subtle, eerie movements, new camps, strange shapes in reconnaissance photographs. Rumors filtered back from prisoners, tales of a place called Die Schwarze Grube, the Black Pit, a facility, they claimed, where something far worse than dragons was being bred. Elias requested a scouting flight. It was denied. So we went anyway, He took Morvern and Nyx, flying deep into enemy territory under moonlight. No fires, no roars, just shadows. They found it near the Hards Mountains, a chasm, not a base, not a fortress, a crater in the earth. Artificial by the look of it, but impossibly deep. Within its depths, lights glowed blue and green, and moving within them, hulking shapes, wingless, misshapen, not dragons, something else. Nyx recoiled. Morvern growled low, feathers along his spine rising. Elias reached out with his thoughts, but nothing returned. No minds to touch, only echoes. Whatever was down there, it wasn't alive in the way dragons were. It had been built. Then the lights turned upward, and the anti-air guns opened fire. They escaped, barely. Nyx took a shot to the wing and spun out. Morvern doubled back and caught her mid-air. Elias hung on only by the thinnest thread of will. His thoughts scattered, his bond with Morvern burning hot like iron pressed to skin. They landed in a ravine an hour later, too far behind enemy lines to radio for help. Elias used every trick he knew to shield them, but it wasn't enough. German scouts found them by dawn, and that's when something miraculous happened. The Red Brood came. All three. They hadn't been summoned. They hadn't been called. But they knew. One moment, Elias was cornered, pistol drawn, Nyx bleeding at his feet. The next, the forest exploded in fire. Red scales, golden eyes, shrieking thunder. The Brood didn't just destroy the patrol. They eradicated it. Not out of loyalty to Elias, but because something had dared to threaten one of their own. And as they circled above him, flames licking their teeth, Elias understood something terrible and beautiful. The dragons were not his army. He was theirs. Elias returned to British command with news too wild to believe, and scars too deep to ignore. The general scoffed at the idea of the Black Pit. They dismissed the existence of the manufactured creatures, until Nyx, still limping, unfurled her wounded wing to reveal the charred bullet lodged in her sinew. It was no standard shell. It pulsed with a faint green glow, and it was cold. That same night, Carnix, the missing Red Brood dragon, returned, but he was not the same. His scales were paler, his eyes sunken. The deep scar along his neck glowed faintly with the same green hue as the bullet. He landed outside the encampment without a roar and refused all commands. Elias approached him carefully, Morvern and Nyx watching from afar. "Carnix," Elias whispered, "where have you been?" There was no answer, not even a rumble of breath, but then Carnix opened his mouth, and from within spilled not fire but smoke. Not dragon smoke, but something blacker, oilier. It hissed like a whisper and twisted in the air, like it had language. It took 3 days for Elias to understand the message. The Germans had built something alive from dead dragons, or perhaps from the idea of dragons. A weapon forged in silence. They called it der stille Gott, the silent God. A beast without breath, without heart, but with endless hunger. It lived deep in the Black Pit, and it fed on fire. The war was changing again. This was no longer a battle of men or trenches. It was a war of ancient things reborn. Elias warned the Allied command, but only a handful listened. A rogue circle of officers who had seen too much to remain skeptics. They helped Elias form a new plan, a strike not on German lines, but on the Black Pit itself. He called it Operation Hollow Flame, a suicide mission, unless the dragons flew with them, and they did. The night of the assault, 5 dragons took to the sky. Morvern, Nyx, the Red Brood, and Carnix, bound now by strange magic, but still obedient. Elias rode at the front, flamelight reflecting in his eyes. Behind them flew a small fleet of biplanes, armed with experimental ether bombs designed to rupture magical fields. They reached the black pit just before dawn. The silence was immediate. No birds, no wind, just a low hum from the chasm below. Then it rose. Der stille Gott, a colossus. Its body was forged of iron and bone, its wings like collapsed cathedrals. Its mouth, when it opened, revealed not teeth, but rows of horns, screaming without sound. It had no eyes, but it saw, and it flew. The dragons attacked first, uncoordinated and furious. Fire licked across the sky. The god answered with a burst of void light, blinding even Morvrin. One of the red brood, Eric's, was torn in half, mid-air. Nyx dove to draw its attention, her scream shaking the cliffs. Elias knew it would not be enough, so he unbuckled his harness. He stood on Morvrin's back, arms wide, and he called, not with voice, but with everything he was, to Carnix, to Nyx, to the fire in their veins, to the dragon in himself. And they heard him. The last thing Elias remembered was heat, brighter than any sun, and the weight of the sky breaking. Then, blackness. When he awoke, he was on the edge of the crater. It was empty. The god was gone. So was Carnix. So was Morvrin. Only Nyx remained, curled protectively around his body, scales blistered and wings tattered. She did not speak. She did not move. She only watched the sky. The crater where Der stille Gott once stood became known among soldiers as the Ash Wound. No plant grew there. No animals came near. Birds flying over would veer away, confused mid-flight. Even maps marked it only as unstable. Elias recovered slowly. His lungs were burned, and his mind felt stretched like parchment left in the rain. But in time he walked again, spoke again, dreamed again, though never without fire. The High Command buried the truth. They claimed the Battle of the Somme ended with a bold push by British and French forces. A breakthrough in trenches, not sky. No mention of dragons. No mention of the god. Elias didn't mind. He never wanted fame. He wanted peace. Nyx lived with him in the highlands for a time, high above the lochs, where the wind was clean and the air quiet. She flew rarely, her injuries too deep, but on still mornings, she would rest beside Elias and press her warm muzzle to his shoulder. They never spoke. They didn't need to. But one day, Nyx rose, stretched her torn wings, and let out a single thunderous cry, and she flew, higher than before, toward the sun, until she was only a glint. She did not return. Years passed. The war ended. Elias grew old. He married once briefly, laughed, lost, learned to live like a man again. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the fire and stare into the embers. And if the flames danced a certain way, if the wind hissed just right, he would close his eyes. And he would remember the dragons. All of them. Not as weapons, not as beasts, but as the only things that ever truly understood what the war cost. Because in the end, the dragons had not saved the Allies. They had ended something far older than politics. They had burned the gods of war themselves. And somewhere, Elias hoped, they flew still, red wings tearing the night sky, hunting the silence before it could return.